There we go. All right. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on strengthening the coach-player relationship to improve mental health. I'm Dr. Carla Chugani. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Content and Affairs at Mantra Health, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you today moderating this incredible panel of speakers. Today's webinar is meant to be a discussion, so we won't have any slides for you to look at. Instead, I'll be asking our panelists to dive into their wealth of expertise to talk with us about the important role of coaches, how they can support student-athlete mental health, and what can be done to support both parties. And in particular, during today's discussion, we'll be addressing the culture within collegiate athletic departments, coach mindset, the changing needs of Gen Z athletes, access points for integrating mental health and emotional well-being into collegiate athletics, and the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So before we jump in, I just want to take a moment to introduce our panelists for today. I'm super honored to be joined by Stephen Hebard, the Chief Innovation Officer at Prevention Strategies, Debbie Wardlaw, Director of Athletics at Columbia College, and Joe Valerio, former NFL athlete and Senior Director and Regional Client Service Operations Officer at Willis Towers Watson. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and let's jump into it. I want to start us off by talking a little bit about the role of coaches. So historically, coaches have held the main responsibility of leading players and encouraging those winning performances. And it's true that every campus is different, right? So certainly some coaches have a dual role, dual responsibilities, but it's only been more recently that coaches have become responsible for the health and well-being of their athletes. So Joe, I'm wondering if you can kick us off by talking a little bit about how this role has changed and what's now expected of a coach.
Sure, Carla. Thank you. And again, as Carla said, this is such an honor to be here with all of you and share experiences with you. And I'll give you some perspective from where I sit, having had different experiences. And that's a great question, Carla. I had the great fortune of playing sports at the high school, college, and was lucky enough to play at the professional level. And I can't tell you how many different types of coaches I had. I can't tell you enough about how much they meant to me in my life. And I also want to express, the fact that while my wife, who is a lifelong school teacher and educator, and how I value education, I can remember most of my teachers, but I can always remember my coaches. So it's a hugely impactful position that you hold in people's lives, whether they're youth or adults, and you have a tremendous impact. And I think what it comes down to, Carla, is expectations. The expectations have changed. I think back to my days as a player, and I think, and I also, just for context, I coached high school football for 11 years. I coached youth sports for about 15. And so, and I have corporate experience. So got all this different types of coaching experience. And it's all about expectations, I think. And if I had to sum it up into one concept, it's new school versus old school, to use that terminology, because old school coaches, as you know, they didn't really have the relationships that they have today with their players. And there was a different set of expectations. It was, disciplinarian. It was, basically wanting undivided attention of their players at all times, creating, almost like an atmosphere of fear. I hate to use that term, but that's how I felt about most of my coaches growing up. But today, it's such a different environment, right? With social media, with the advent of all of those things that come along with social media and what goes on in the world that we all can see. We're in a fishbowl. There's an emphasis now on the positive relationship with athletes, having a more collaborative environment with your athletes and listening to them. So I know it was a long answer to a short question, Carla, but I really think it comes down to the expectations of a new school coach today with all of the trappings versus how you may have been raised or what you learned by example of old school coaches. And that's the pitfall I think that we all need to be aware of.
Okay, I see. And Stephen, I saw you nodding your head a lot as Joe was talking, and I
Yeah.
was wondering if you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah. I'm always sort of like bursting at the seams to jump in on these conversations. I appreciate you getting us kicked off, Joe. I was just thinking about, one of the things that's changed is we just know a lot more about coaches and we know more about these types of relationships. And one of the things I was thinking about is that within the context of the coach athlete relationship, um, coaches can impact athletes in a lot of different ways. And one of those ways that was sort of coming to top of mind was something that people can understand, which is intrinsic motivation, right? The point of coaching is to get our athletes motivated to do the things that we as coaches have expertise in pushing success forward, right? And so, one thing that we know a lot better now is that coaches can do things like promote a sense of belonging amongst their athletes. Coaches can promote a sense of agency amongst their athletes. And
Mhm.
these are things that help them get more motivated, where previously coaches never would have promoted agency as an important piece of the puzzle, right? We now have a better sense of if we can actually support athletes in having some decision making about the behaviors that they're making as um, parts of a team, or we can create a supportive culture where people, no matter your skill level or your role in the team, you feel like you belong to this collective or to something bigger than yourself. Um, it actually it improves things for athletes.
Okay. And one of the things that is sort of a theme between what you and Joe said, I think relates to the impact that coaches have on athletes. And we know that the relationship between coaches and athletes can be very impactful on the success of the individual, but also that whole team. And I'm wondering, Stephen, if you could talk a little bit more about how mental health plays into that dynamic and what is the role of a coach in promoting mental wellness?
Yeah, I sure can. And I'll try to keep this brief, but I have a lot of thoughts. I think to break the question down into a couple of parts, we have to think about how the coach athlete relationship is influenced by the mental health of each person. But we also need to think about how the coach athlete relationship is influential on the mental health of the athlete, right? So to make that distinction a little bit more clear, like everybody has mental health, right? But like the dynamics at play between those two people, between a coach and an athlete, may be related to their own mental health experiences. So an athlete might interpret a coach's behavior as being threatening when they're trying to be motivating. A coach might interpret an athlete's behavior as being inappropriate, and really what they're trying to do is find some connection or try to regulate themselves. So um, it's kind of complex, and coaches need to understand their own mental health and then how they're impacted by the mental health and the experiences of their athletes, right? So then the other side of that is how the coach athlete relationship is influential on the mental health of the athlete. And really the last, I would say 15 years or so of research tell us a lot, that a coach can be this source of safety and support, that they can be integral into things like helping them develop emotion regulation skills or develop self-esteem. Um, even things like, and maybe this maybe is a little bit more clear, but influential on performance anxiety, which a
Mhm.
lot of athletes struggle with. And fortunately, the sports psychology profession has really boomed and become more normalized. Um, the other side of that is that coaches who are mistrustful, who are overly dominant, lack respect, they have a negative impact on well-being. Using fear and intimidation, we know, can increase anxiety and um, challenge concentration, those sorts of things. So there's sort of these two different ways of thinking about this question. But coaches clearly have a huge impact, as Joe again said as we got kicked off. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the role down the line in this conversation, but I want to say first and foremost that coaches are leaders that establish team culture. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is the values and the attitudes and the behaviors of the coach, those become viewed as normal and acceptable by the
Mhm.
athletes on a team, right? And so if a coach drives forward the idea that mental wellness is important, that mental health is important, that being vulnerable is important, that supporting each other is important, then it's much more likely that becomes normalized across the team context and at the individual level as well.
Yeah. And Debbie, as an athletic director, I'm just curious if you have additional thoughts on, how mental health plays into that dynamic and the role of the coach.
Yeah, I really agree with both Joseph and Stephen when there's a comparison between kind of old school mentality and coaching and the new school and things that coaches have to do now. Coaches have a lot of impact on students' well-being and also the culture and also the experiences that student athletes have and their engagement in the sport and the mental health of everyone who's in that kind of pot of athletics is just really important. And it's always important for coaches to kind of be mindful of those things and also the student athletes. I know we're talking about relationships and all the relationship and the impact of that does not always rely on the coach itself, but it also relies on the willingness of the athlete to be a little more open to suggestions and also be open to the resources that the coaches have and that will provide on mental health. One of the things when I was going through school, I had two coaches, volleyball and basketball, and I had a really great relationship with the volleyball coach and love her to this day, but my basketball coach, we just kind of like that love and hate kind of thing. But reflecting on that and being a part of an atmosphere that can really shape how you feel about yourself, how you take care of yourself is really important. And just understanding that as a leader and myself, understanding that that relationship is very important and the people you put in place to lead those student athletes and lead your organization, that's a big piece of it.
Yeah, I love the way you frame that as somebody who has not played sports at a high level. I mean, aside from, soccer around the field with the, the other young people, that framing of, being mindful that this is an environment that can really shape the way this young person feels about themselves. It really stands in contrast to what has been mentioned already by Stephen and Joe regarding that more old school mindset or the traditional mindset that some of our coaches may be coming in with. So I want to ask us now to transition into some discussion on how to support coaches and what are the resources that we can provide to them. So we typically think of coaches as being brought in as experts that will lead a team to success. Of course, they are not typically trained as counselors. They don't typically come in with a clinical background, right? So Stephen, what are your thoughts on the extent to which mental health is really the coach's responsibility?
This is an awesome question, and it's a really tough one, but I'm going to do my best. I would say an athlete's mental health is not the responsibility of the coach, but their influence and their impact on each individual athlete, including their mental health, is their responsibility to some degree, right? So what I mean is a coach doesn't need to be able to diagnose and treat their athlete's mental health, right? But they should be working to understand what mental health looks like, how it manifests behaviorally, when behaviors associated with someone's mental health are indicative of something problematic. They should have some knowledge, some awareness around those pieces. And so I think that there's a few different responsibilities here that are important for coaches to be thinking about and really be trained on. So first and foremost is the idea of mental health literacy. And what mental health literacy is knowledge, right? So what does anxiety, depression, substance abuse look like? What are the implications of trauma? Again, you don't need to know the criteria in the DSM, but having a sense of how depression shows up in athletes is really powerful information. But in addition to that knowledge, having positive attitudes about it, right? So like being willing to actively consider how you might apply that knowledge with your teams, with your coach, or being open to speaking to that knowledge with your teams. And then finally, the confidence to apply it. So like knowing how to approach an athlete who might be struggling with one of these things, knowing how to respond if an athlete were to approach you. And really, really importantly, what is the referral process for an athlete who might be struggling? So one of the really big responsibilities of a coach is to know your team outside of your team. Like, who are the staff within our organization that can be supportive, who are appropriate, or like, what is the right mental health treatment? Not the right mental health treatment option, but what are the mental health treatment options for my athletes before I ever run into some sort of problem?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And Joe and Debbie, I'm wondering if either of you are having further thoughts that you want to share on this one regarding, to what extent is mental health the responsibility of the coach?
I'll jump in there, Deb, if you don't mind. I think it just, what Stephen was saying reminded me of one of my coaches that I had when I was with the Kansas City Chiefs. And I used to ask him, how does he keep his energy level up? Like, he was an absolute machine when it came to understanding each of his players, understanding how each of them were motivated. Again, going back to Stephen's awesome answer. Stephen, that was a great answer. And as far as coaches not having to be clinical psychologists, but having to be aware of these things. And he knew that every player was motivated differently. He expended as much energy coaching us both on the field and off the field. It wasn't just the activity of doing blocking drills and all that stuff. It was on and off the field. He spent as much time being a coach as we did being players. And I really respected that as a player. And he understood, like I said, not to repeat myself, but how each of us was motivated. He understood what our expectations were. And here's what I think was one of the best things he did when it came to mental health and the awareness around it, is he treated the backup who never played the same way that he treated the starter who was an all-pro. And to me, that was like encapsulates the whole concept of expending that as much energy as your players, because he would coach the backup, literally, who you knew was never going to get on the field, coach them exactly the same. And when they made a mistake, he would praise in public and he would criticize in private and do all those things and coach that player as if that player was going to play 100 plays in the next game. And to me, that set the example, and that's what players are looking for, and that promotes and encourages them to feel like a part of the team. I was not an everyday starter, and I think that's why I was in that boat. I was pretty much a career backup in the NFL. But I'm telling you, this coach treated me like I was going to the Pro Bowl every year. And to me, that really helped me have more confidence in what I was doing, and was just a small example of something that I think coaches can do to provide that kind of environment. Is you gotta put in the work, you gotta put in the energy, and show each player by example that you're there for them, and that you want them to have a great experience. And I think that's what I really appreciated when I saw from one of my favorite coaches.
Okay. And I'm wondering if Debbie has further thoughts, because I saw her kind of smiling and nodding. Debbie, is there anything further you'd like to add here?
Yeah, Stephen brought up a really great point about mental health literacy. I think that is a big, big piece of it. In my department here at Columbia College, and we're South Carolina, that is one of the main professional development opportunities we're having for our staff, just to be able to not to be the counselor, not to be the one who diagnosed these things, but be mindful and be patient and be proactive and practicing like application to what's going on with the student athlete. It's they made a point earlier that treating everyone as an individual, but sometimes, in the coach's aspect, when you have like a track and field team, you have 40 to 50, 60, 70 kids, and you're in a small program like Columbia College where we have maybe 5 or 6 coaches, the individuality of the student athlete kind of get lost in the entire group. But if you are mindful and you are practicing the mental health literacy and you're understanding some of the terminology. And when a player comes to you and makes a comment, or they don't make a comment, or they don't respond, or they respond out of character, and some will hold the same character all the time and then reach out to someone else, that's the big piece. Am I going to take a little time out of my day just to talk to the athlete, say something at practice, maybe call them over after practice, or even reach out 8 o'clock at night saying, hey, I saw you have some difficulties. Sorry, I couldn't get with you. But being that coach and being really not prepared, but understanding and being, mindful of those interactions you have with your student athletes are just really important.
Yeah, so I think there's a real synthesis between, across what all of you said in terms of awareness that the coach is not a clinician, is not there to be a counselor, but certainly there's some elements of the psychology of being an athlete that coaches probably need to be aware of, and the awareness of how individuals might be different. And that individual needs are not static over time, right? So, the kid is doing great, and then suddenly something happens and they're not doing great, and you've got to be able to pick up on that. And that also pulls in this theme that we've been hearing about of the importance of mental health literacy. So I want to dig more into this clinical support aspect with you, Debbie, if you wouldn't mind. We know that not every coach understands the importance of having clinical support. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what can the campus do to support the coaches? And what's the role of the athletic director in that?
So I kind of think those two things go hand in hand, the campus and the support of the athletic director, because, basically the athletics director is an administrator from the campus side, and we don't want to really separate that. But as an athletic director and administrator of the college, you have to have opportunities for coaches to understand and practice those things. You've got to give them opportunities to be a better version of their self than they were before, and understanding those things. Here at Columbia College, we brought in some of our counselors. They were in the building. They've been in the building all year. They walked down here. They had an office here before we had a rise in some staff members, but that relationship and meeting those counselors and having those counselors in the building, and as a leader, it's just important to kind of start it almost like a waterfall effect. I do believe that if my staff think that I have, a player in the game that I have, that I think is important enough to push that element, and that they would too, or at least look at it in a different light, like not as something that, oh, she's making us do this, but it's something that I should do because of the professionalism and supporting the student athlete. Getting to these webinars, and also going out and seeking some other development, because, if I had the budget to send my coaching staff of 25, off to Las Vegas for a, conference on mental health, I would definitely do that. But, now things have changed. You have these virtual elements, the webinar, great 2 or 3 minute reads are very important for supporting staff. And that's kind of what's important. If you put it in their face all the time, I kind of think they're gonna say, okay, so this is good. This is something that we're gonna do. This is one of the goals of the department to do that. Our Student Athletic Association is very heavy into that, those mental health days. And, when an athlete goes to a coach and asks, hey, can I have a mental health day? It's really good that the coach understands what it's for, and why are you presenting us with this information? So that education piece is very important. Professional development, making sure that they understand that the campus is really serious about this, and having that counselor here in the building, if you can't get them in the building, to walk through the building and have a real unique partnership with that person is really important.
Incredible. Yeah. And what I hear you saying is that a lot of what the campus can do and what the athletic director can do is tied, partially to setting a culture and setting an expectation that these things are things that we are going to be aware of and mindful of and respectful of, inclusive of, but also concrete educational opportunities and resources that are needed to stimulate that culture and that awareness. And so, Stephen, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, from your perspective, what mental health resources should all coaches have access to?
Yeah, sure thing. I think that the NCAA has done a really good job at getting this conversation started and providing a framework for colleges and universities specifically, but I think it's applicable outside of the college and university context. And they've developed the NCAA mental health best practices that provide some guidance in how to be addressing mental health in athletics departments. And there's sort of these four main topics within it that I'll share quick. And one is access to licensed mental health professionals. Certainly hiring them and having them in-house is preferred, but ultimately schools are not all resourced the same way. They're in different parts of the country, and the access to mental health professionals isn't the same way, but creating that access in whatever way possible is important. Second is emergency and non-emergency action plans. So if there were to be a crisis with a student athlete, what do? We do X, Y, and Z. We have this referral process in place. Confidential mental health screening, I think, is really important. And then in addition to that, the NCAA recommends creating a culture that supports mental well-being and resilience. And the way that I interpret that is creating these educational opportunities for everyone within the context of an athletics department. And I think that as much as we can, we should be advocating for that education to be evidence-based, research programming that tells us that there's some validity to the types of education that we're bringing in for athletes, for coaches, for staff members. And I have two specific resources I'd love to share, if that's okay.
Sure.
The first is called Coaches Assist. Coaches Assist was developed by the Center for Athlete Wellbeing at UNC Greensboro in collaboration with the NCAA Sports Science Institute. And you can find that online very easily. Coaches Assist, type that in Google. It should be the first thing there. And what it is it's an empathic response training video that helps coaches have meaningful conversations about mental wellness with their student athletes. So it's a training, but it provides a lot of really nice guidance. It's something you can do at home on your computer. You can pause it and come back to it. It's really fantastic. So I wanted to share that as one immediate thing you could go do. You could log off right now and go do that on your own if you'd like to. And the other one that I'll share is I've been really fortunate to work with the Helinski's Hope Foundation. The Mark and Kim Helinski are the parents of Tyler Helinski, who died by suicide a few years ago. And they have made it their mission to destigmatize mental illness and promote help-seeking behaviors among collegiate student athletes. They're a fantastic group. They're fantastic people, and they're doing really great work. They have they do talks at colleges and universities. I think they get the ball rolling. That really helps start important conversations with coaches and with student athletes. And they've also developed some programming that can be accessed by student athletes that I think is really powerful and goes towards creating these stigma-free environments where mental health help seeking becomes viewed as a strength rather than as something that should be punished, which is a huge fear of student athletes. And that organization, again, is the Helinski's Hope Foundation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. And one thing I just want to note for all of our audience members is, Stephen has raised some really important resources. And I know all of our panelists probably have ideas on the resources that are going to be most valuable. So we will follow up with you after this webinar and just send you a listing of some of the resources and programs that were mentioned today, just in case you want to read more about them on your own time. Okay, so we have a few more discussion points I'd love for us to get through before we get to Q&A. So I'm going to move us along to a little bit more of a focus on the individual and the team. One of the things that we were discussing, both when we were preparing for this webinar and that has come up in our discussions already today, is the balance between a coach's focus on the individual versus a focus on the team. And Debbie, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your thoughts on how coaches do put the needs of the individual before the needs of the team.
Yes, great. So I've been a coach for years and recently kind of retired. I'm the director of athletics now. What coaches can do is not point out always competition between athletes. You know, it's really hard not to be in that competitive nature. And as a coach, you're really competitive. You're looking at wins and losses. For one thing, your standings in the conference, and it's really important that you beat your rivals. And it's sometimes coaches may get caught up in doing the comparison, athletic comparison on their team and with individuals they're competing against. One of the things that coaches can kind of look at is how an athlete can compete with themselves. When you're looking at times, you know, if I run the 100-meter dash in like a 11.1 or let's say 11.3, and I know the person beat me and they ran a 10.9, you know, instead of saying, well, Debbie, you didn't beat Sarah, you know, so what are you going to do to, how much workout or what are you going to do to beat Sarah, instead of saying, hey, Debbie, you know, you got a 11.3, I need you at 11.1. So let's see how to build to get to do that. One of the things that I kind of push, especially with a lot of the team sports, because they have areas inside the buildings and where they can do motivational things, is to allow them to have the athlete compete against themselves by being rewarded for things. You know, if you're the best rebounder, if you have the highest hitting percentage, put that on Front Street, put that on bulletin boards or on their locker saying, hey, you're leading it this way, you're leading this way, but there are things that you can do to be better. As coaches, you want to beat the other team, but you do want to be mindful that you're not dealing with 5 people who are going to move simultaneously in the same at all times. There are going to be some people that drop off and maybe fall down, and that you really have to pick up, and that you have to be aware when a kid is struggling. I had a student athlete, we were playing a basketball game, and I looked at her and I said, are you okay? And she said, yeah, I'm okay, I'm going to get it. And you know what's so interesting? Her grandmother always sat behind me. It's a group of grandmas that sat behind me. And she looked at me one day and she said, you gotta take Ashley off the court because she is struggling right now. And until she said it, I didn't think that, okay, the reason why her performance is so bad because she's struggling. Got her on the court, sat her down, got my assistant coach to kind of talk through some things and told her what we needed, put her back on the next quarter, and she performed a little better. But just having that awareness that you don't have to pit them against their teammate, that you can work with some kind of resources and different kind of coaching tools to have them maybe compete against an achievement that that athlete wants to do. Because, you know, the bottom line is, yeah, we're in higher education and this college, it could be some high school coaches on there, but sometimes the player doesn't have the same end goals as the coach. Not everybody wants to be an Olympian. Not everybody wants to be a professional basketball player, or if you're in high school, play in college. Sometimes they just want to play and be competitive in the game.
Very interesting points. I was laughing to myself as you were talking about, you know, beating your own personal record instead of competing against other people, because I think that is one of the tools that Peloton actually uses to motivate people like me to ride the thing. And it really does work, right? Some people really want to compete against a group, against the whole pack, and some people find a lot of joy in competing against themselves. And Joe, I saw you smiling and nodding a lot as Debbie was speaking, and I know that you do think a lot about motivation and growth mindset and things like that. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what are the practices that we need to change and the practices that we need to adopt as coaches to better support our young athletes?
Well, Carla, first of all, I am learning so much from these fine folks. I'm telling you, I have a saying, I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room. So there's some great people here to learn from, and I'm so honored to be with them. I think one thing that we have to, just to kind of dovetail a little bit on what Deb was saying, I think I love that concept of getting people to compete against themselves, but I also think that to add to that, we need to get, and going to answer your question, get people to feel like they're contributing to what they're doing, no matter what their, I'm going to use this term incorrectly, how small their role seems to be, or the perception of how small that role seems to be. I'm going to the backup versus the starter thing, where make people, you got to have coaches that will spend the energy getting people to feel like they are contributing to the greater goal of the team every moment of the day. And whether it's being better out in the community, right? See, I look at sports as like an iceberg, right? We as consumers of sports, we only see the tip of the iceberg that's poking its head out of the water, right? We see the reaction of coaches for a minute, right? Just a second when the coach's face is flashed on the screen of either a social media post or a television broadcast or whatever, or a newspaper article. If anybody still reads newspaper, I know I do. But so you see that the tip of the iceberg. You see the wins and losses, right? You see the stat lines, the bylines. You hear the ESPN top 10. Like, that's what we see. But there's this whole giant piece of the iceberg that is floating below the water of what a team really is made of. It's made up of individuals who are coming together, and just kind of get back to what Deb was saying. Not all of them want to go to the next level. Not all of them want to play at the next level, or maybe sometimes even be the starter. They want to contribute in their own way. So I think what we need to do is spend more energy celebrating the individuals on the team, how they contribute to the team, see more, get people to see more of the iceberg, and promote those social equity and social justice projects and community projects that teams are doing, and make it more than just the wins and losses. What is this team doing to contribute to society as a whole, starting with its own individuals, and then also what the team as a unit is doing to the organization they're a part of, whether it's a youth organization or a college or organization or professional, whatever it might be. What are they doing to be better citizens as individuals, as a group? And I think we need to somehow figure out, and I don't have the answers, but we need to somehow get our goals aligned. I feel for coaches in today's environment, going back to that iceberg analogy, right? Everybody sees the wins and losses. It's a high pressure situation at every level, all the way from Little League. I think Little League might have more high pressure than major college at this point, knowing some of the parents that I know. But there's this pressure cooker of being ultra successful in the W and L columns, and we forget that there's a much greater picture, or a much greater cause at hand that we need to be aware of, and somehow getting organizations and people to align those goals, and not always focus on the wins and losses, and to focus on what we're doing. It's kind of like, to use a corporate term that I'm getting more familiar with, that's been spending more time in the corporate world, it's sort of that triple bottom line, right? It's not just about what you're doing with your bottom line today in the corporate world, how much profit you make and your earnings per share ratio and all that stock market stuff. It's also about, what are you doing for the environment? What are you doing to create a company of inclusion and diversity, to celebrate what our company should be about? So it's sort of like taking that mentality and trying to get more people aligned to that. I think that's would be a big change that I would love to see come into sports, is less focus on the W's and L's and a little more focus on what we're doing for the players, their future, and also to be part of the greater good.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you bring that up. I never thought of it like that, but as I was listening to you speak about, the need to look beyond the game and the end point of the game, really, it's what you're describing is very aligned with the overall mission of higher education, right? It's the higher education is not it's true that one of the objectives is to graduate a capable and competent young person who's ready to go out into their field of choice. But it's not the only objective, right? And our institutions of higher education put a lot of effort into nurturing and helping these young people to develop in a lot of diverse ways that matter to them and are consistent with, not just this one singular goal, but the many different types of goals or values that they might have, both inside athletics and outside of athletics. And so you mentioned a lot about diversity, inclusion, and things of that nature. And I think that that's a really good spot for us to end on. And I'm interested to hear what all of you think. I do want to start off with Debbie for this question, though. The question is, how can we build more cultural awareness in collegiate athletics? And what are the DEI issues that all coaches need to keep at top of mind?
Thank you. That's really a great one to end on. And I do believe that Columbia College, the NAIA are doing a really great job with diversity, equity, and inclusion to the point where they're focusing on hiring and focusing on leadership and making sure that representation in colleges, representations in the NAIA itself, when you look to hire a group, and let's say at Columbia College, the most coaches I have is 5 in track and field. You want to make sure that you have a diverse group of people and you want to make sure it's inclusive. The need for that is so important. As a student athlete, if I'm having a concern or if I'm having a mental health challenge, who am I going to talk to? And that's really, really important, especially in the climate that we're in now. We want to make sure that they are comfortable, that coaches are approachable, and that there is somebody there for them to talk to. Columbia College is an interesting landscape where 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we were all women's college, especially in the athletics department, and now we're co-ed. And as we get into this different little mix of soup here, how are we going to be able to deliver some things to our student athletes, and how diverse is our staff going to be to help manage and support them? So it's really, really important making sure that you have people on your staff who students can relate to, and students can see that, you look like me, so I can come and talk to you. I go back to track and field because it was just kind of like an interesting situation where they wanted to hire a female track and field coach because, it was all women's and we had 45, 50 women and it was a couple of male coaches, and they were just like, listen, we need some help here. So just them knowing that they needed a little diversity so that the student athletes could approach someone was very important. Athletic departments have to really look at the landscape. You have to be able to be intentional in your desire to be inclusive, to be equitable, to be diverse, and colleges and universities, I think, are moving toward those kinds of things, the intent of it, and making sure that people are comfortable in the environment they are and that they're engaged, and student athletes have the experiences that they can go 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, go back and look at their experiences and their time at their university and college and say, you know what, I had a great time, and remember when. It's all about the remembering when, like Joe said, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, Joe and Stephen, did you have any further thoughts that you wanted to add to that most eloquent and wonderful answer?
I'll jump in really quick. I think for coaches, it's really important, for no coach, no anyone understands the lived experience of every single person out there, right? And so really taking that first step and saying, like, I don't know what you've been through or what it's like to be someone that looks like or is different than me in any other way, right? So sort of carrying forward the spirit of empathy is really important, to try your best to put yourself in the shoes of people with a variety of backgrounds, but then understanding that you'll never truly understand what that's like. But having a desire to learn is really important. And the first step, I think, a first step might be just doing some self-reflection and saying, okay, maybe I'm a white male coach in a very rural white area, and I have not coached many or any Black student athletes before. What comes up for me when I think about what it would be like for me to coach a Black athlete, right? Like taking the time to really sit with what that might be like for you is really important. Understanding where your biases are, where you find yourself stereotyping. Start by owning the uncomfortable stuff and then work towards having conversations, exploring that. Go see a counselor, talk to them about it. I think it's really hard work, but it's really important work, because ultimately coaching is about connecting, and we can't connect with people when we don't have respect for their unique experiences.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think one of the things I'm learning from you all is that our collegiate athletes, our young athletes, have often very diverse backgrounds and intersectional identities. And they probably do need access not only to clinicians who represent that diversity and intersectionality, but coaches that are, culturally literate and able to embody the cultural humility that's necessary to connect with them. And this was actually brought up by one of the folks in the audience today. So I want to raise this question because I think it's so important to this topic. So Beverly writes, it occurs to me that cultural literacy and humility would be a necessary tool for coaches. And taking that a step further, I'm wondering, how do we train coaches to do that? And are there resources available for that?
I'm going to jump in real quick. I think that's just it's an overall thing that's necessary, but not only necessary for coaches.
Oh, yeah.
That's just advocating as a former coach and athletics director of a program that I think those cultural literacy and humility things are a part of a nationwide stance on understanding some of the cultural identities and cultural challenges or understanding, or as Stephen said, a self-reflection of who you are and how do you want to represent yourself, but also who the institution is and who the team is and how do you want to represent that institution and those kinds of things. So the administration can be a help with that, a lot of self-reflecting, but I do think it is overall, we should take an overall stance, not just coaches, but everybody, faculty and staff, everybody that's on that campus or within that community, those people who, maintain buildings, who serve lunch, who work in the cafe. It's just really important to understand that and have people have a welcoming situation or experience when you go to different campuses that are not like your campuses, so say so.
Okay. And I do want to make some time for question and answer from the audience, if you don't mind. We have quite a big audience. So folks in the audience, please drop your questions in the chat and we'll try and get to them. And I want to kick us off with a question from Ellen, who's asking, given the stress that coaches are under, win-loss, alum expectations, admin expectations, et cetera, what do you see as the role of the institution to support the mental health of the coach? We know the coach's mental health impacts the students. Anyone want to dive in on that?
I love the question. Again, I love all these questions. I think the mental health of the coach is probably not addressed by the institution in many cases. I think it's a fantastic thing to bring up, and something that coaches taking positions should be asking of their athletic directors or whoever's on a hiring panel, right? They should be saying, hey, this is a hard job. I want as many resources as I can get so that I can provide what you're expecting, which, at the collegiate level typically does end up being success on the field or on the court. And, my mental health, my ability to have the headspace to be present and to be supportive of my athletes and help them achieve the best of their abilities is to be able to take care of myself. So what resources are there for me? So I don't know that I'm adding much here, but just saying, like, Ellen, I love the idea, and let's help coaches be better advocates for themselves as well as their teams. This is great.
Yes, and I also, just real quick to add, as a athletic administrator, sometimes we do see that we miss that opportunity. When crisis arrives on your campus, you take care of the student athletes, and you sometimes, not intentionally, you do not check on the coaches, or you do it in an afterthought. And it is important to advocate for them and make sure that they're good. Summer is a great time to unwind and make spaces for coaches to kind of relax a little bit and get in a great headspace and stuff like that. So I really agree with Stephen. The coaches having the ability to advocate for themselves, the administration, the admin, the athletics director, understanding that, hey, maybe I do need a break. We have swim school going on, and it's a 6-week situation, and our swim coach, who is the aquatics director, is running that program. And I was telling some people, I know he's going to need a couple of days off to unwind before school starts. So allowing them those opportunities to do that, but also providing them with some tools and education so that they can take care of themselves and have some self-care moments.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I found myself really relating to both of you. So I've never been a coach. I have been a professor. And I think it's a very similar thing. And please correct me if I'm wrong here, that, especially with COVID, our coaches and our faculty, were under tremendous pressure. And when we were down, that brought the kids down. And so, bringing it back to something that Stephen said earlier about that self-reflection piece, I would find myself, reflecting on, okay, I feel kind of snappy or snarky right now, trying to answer this question for this student, but who's the person, how do I want to represent myself? Who's the person I want to be in this interaction with this young person? And it seems like it's a similar thread with coaches, where there's this transactional nature between, how the coaches are doing and how the young people are doing. So we have a couple more great questions I want to try and ask really quickly before we run out of time. What are some additional ways to remove stigma with coaches who hold tight to an old mentality that creates a wall between them and mental health literacy, DEI, et cetera?
Well, I'll just jump in and say that sounds like pass that buck to Deb. It sounds like it's one of the things, like, it kind of dovetails what we were just saying, right? I mean, what are the resources that are available for coaches to ensure that they're attending, talks like this, or have access to those resources? And I'll say one last thing before I'm sure Deb's shaking her head, she's going to want to answer this, but it's no different in the corporate world. Our trainings are probably 3 times as many for our, I'll call them our colleagues, as they are for people managers. So it like professors in higher education institutions, Carla, it's all the same. We just tend to, we miss out on our leadership training. So I think, I think it's just a matter of, finding those resources. I'll kind of let Deb, it looked like Deb wanted to jump in there.
No, you've done a really great job in answering that question, because, wherever you are, what space you're in, that's the answer to that question. Just making sure that they have the resources and tools to understand it. And as a leader and leadership and sitting there going through all the training, you have to give those tools to the people you work with, and make sure that the old school mentality of run through the wall. Oh, I don't care if you're having a bad day, run through that wall anyway. That we don't have those attitudes anymore. Sometimes it takes leaders and other people who see something not right, or see that this situation isn't right, and that they kind of call them out, and you deal with it in other ways, but making sure that they have the training and literacy. So Joe really had a great answer for that.
If I could just piggyback really quick on that one, because I think it's a really important one. It's a really difficult one. One thing is, to Deborah's point, there needs to be a level of accountability, right? So the expectation for these coaches, no matter who they are, needs to be that a change happens. But second to that is, sometimes it takes talking to a coach about what's in it for them, right? So help them understand how by changing their behavior, they get more of what they want. Whether that's performance on the field, it's their athletes listen to them better, makes their job easier. Help them consider how shifting their mindset might be something that directly impacts their day-to-day and what they're getting out of their experience as a coach. So not everybody has the same motivations, and not everybody's going to be able to be budged on some of this stuff, but we can try to do our best to play to the motivations of those coaches.
Absolutely. And I know we are running over time, so I do want to get us wrapped up here, because I'm sure folks have meetings to get to. There are a bunch of great questions that we did not get to in the chat. There's one thing I want to offer, though, is that if you want to continue the discussion, or if you have questions that we weren't able to answer for you, I'm just going to put my email in the chat, and certainly anyone can feel free to email me and continue the conversation. One comment and question that I think we ought to end on. So Scott is asking for tips or suggestions on improving healthcare capacity, including mental health, in higher education, intercollegiate athletics, in light of this sort of scarcity mindset that we have post-pandemic, sort of do more with less type of mentality. And I think, from a clinician perspective, my perspective has always been, if you want to improve capacity, you have to invest. Right. And so, like, Debbie has a clinician that's embedded. Right. And Mantras here and other companies like Mantra are available to provide increased access. You can contact your college counseling center and your health center and see how you can partner, right? So I think from my experience, coming from that healthcare perspective, a lot of times the answer to innovating and improving capacity is really getting out of your silo and looking at all of the wonderful expertise that's around you and trying to find those creative ways to work together. And to a certain degree, it does also mean that there is a financial investment. If you want to increase number of appointments available, usually that's not free. And so those are just sort of some of the practical nuts and bolts to be aware of. And so as we wrap, I'm wondering if anyone has any last thoughts on increasing capacity before we sign off for the afternoon.
Something I was a part of as a doctoral student was, through the counseling department at the university that I was at, I provided some motivational interviewing and substance abuse support for student athletes who are struggling in that way. And that was at no cost to athletics. It was sort of part of my role at the university. I would really highly recommend reaching out to, if you have a social work program, a counseling program, a psychology program, et cetera, and seeing if there's creative ways that you can collaborate with those departments. There may be students, there may be grants, there may be opportunities that maybe just never would have came to mind without making those connections, and just really try your best to be open to those sort of creative ideas.
Yeah, I love that. I also did. I got so much exposure to different things when I was a graduate student, and that really shaped my career. So that's a, real win-win on a campus. So I know that we're over time. I don't want to hold us any longer. So before we sign off, I just want to say a most heartfelt thank you, Debbie, Stephen, Joe. You guys are rock stars. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone who attended this incredible panel. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to learn from you all. And I hope this is just the beginning of many collaborations for us.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you all for having us here today.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.